Hello, this is Idodmg and welcome back to the channel. In this last Epoch video, I want to talk to you about the loot filter. In last Epoch, you're going to find loads and loads and loads of items, and you're going to want to clean up that clutter so you can kind of hone in on the items you need. Otherwise, you're going to be going back to town way too much. And to be honest, a lot of the items don't vendor for that much gold anyway. You're going to want to use last Epoch's loot filter, and hopefully this video will get you the information you need to know to get you going with your very own setup. In order to open the loot filter in last Epoch, you're going to hit Shift F. Once you're in here, you're going to be able to create your own loot filter or import a filter. If you do click on import, it will open up your location on your computer. And then if you're following a build guide or something like that, you can put that filter into your folder on your PC. Otherwise, you can paste clipboard contents. Wouldn't recommend that. I do recommend not being scared of the loot filter in playing with it yourself, because honestly, the loot filter is best tailored to your very own character and your certain gear situation. As you progress through the game, your loot filter will change. Once you decide to go ahead and create your own loot filter, you can give it its very own name if you want to, and you can also enter a description because you can save all your loot filters. So you're going to want to know what filter was for what. You can also pick an icon and color if you so choose. So once you pick the name and icon and color for your loot filter, you can go ahead and make your very first rule. Since we're doing this as a starting filter, we're going to go ahead and filter out the items we don't need. So I am currently playing a rogue. So we're going to go ahead and on the visibility tab, you can decide to show, recolor, or hide. And for this one, we're going to actually hide some of the items we don't need. You can come into here and you can decide to hide certain affixes, which I do not recommend early on, just because you don't want to miss out on an affix that you may accidentally hide, and then you honestly have no idea about. You can also filter out by class requirement. Again, if you're very first starting the season, you may not want to do this. Maybe you want to look for gear for other classes that you intend to play. But since we're playing a rogue, we'll filter out the other 4 classes that we're not really looking for. And then you can also add in certain affixes for that specific item that you've decided to hide. So if we decide to hide added health, for example, what this is going to do is it's only going to hide Primalist, Mage, Sentinel, and Acolyte items that have added health on them. So we wouldn't want to do that because we actually want to hide all of those class-specific items. So let's go ahead and get rid of that rule and update it. Another really fun thing you can do with this is to highlight affixes you do want, and so that they stick out to you. And the way you'd want to do this is by going into your visibility options, and you can do show, where you can choose to emphasize the item's label if you want to, which just makes it look more appealing. Otherwise, you can actually recolor items. These are all the different colors you can choose from. When I'm making my loot filter, which is usually around when I start the end game, is when I really start to get stricter with my loot filter. Like when I very first start out in the campaign, I'll just hide items I don't need. Like if I know I'm going to do a marksman build that uses bows, I'll filter out all the other items that I don't need. But if you keep watching the video, I'm going to show you a trick that you're going to want to do for every single loot filter. But for now, let's go ahead and talk about recolor. The way I run my loot filters is my own type of rarity. And the way that I usually set mine up is the least desired item, but is still useful for my build, will be green, and then it'll go blue, and then it'll go yellow, and then it'll go red. Red being where it has all 4 affixes I want, all the way down to green only having maybe 1 affix I want. And again, as you're progressing, this will change. For example, once all my items have the 1 affix I want on them, then I can delete that rule that only shows them if they have 1 affix. The other thing to point out is when I am making my own filters is I not only do it by color, but I'll also do it by item slot. So I'll have 4 filters like just for my helmet. A green, blue, yellow, red version for the helmet. So it's, 1 to 4 affixes. And then I'll do it literally for each item slot. Congratulations, you're no longer a beginner loot filter user. You've learned the basics. Let's go on to the more advanced information that you should know about the loot filter in last Epoch. I went ahead and switched over to my level 70 something marksman just to kind of show you how I set my loot filter setup. Now, please don't be overwhelmed. Honestly, do not let the loot filter scare you away. It is such a useful tool, and I hope to get the information you need. So now that you know the basics, let's go ahead and learn some more advanced techniques that you can use with your loot filter. So when you're making these rules, you want to place them in the list, because the higher up the rule is on the list, the higher the priority. My number 1 priority is that I always want to see all unique and set items. No matter what my loot filter is, I always make sure that's at the very top. My next priority is for special affixes that are very rare that I'm looking for my build to make sure I do not miss out on them. Oftentimes these are increased level for a certain ability you're using for your build. That is one of the more rare affixes that you can find. But I recommend setting your filter up where I have mine, where I don't have anything really hidden other than certain like types of items that I don't want to see. Like the white, blue, yellow items, I'll still see on the ground, but we're recolored to find the items that I'm actually hunting for my build. And the reason I have this set up this way, especially early on, is you don't want to miss out on an item or an affix that you could factor into your build to make your build more powerful. Now, once you've progressed, you're past like level 80 or whatever, and you have decent gear, you could probably go ahead and hide those white, blue, and yellow items if you want to. And you can do them earlier on. Again, it is entirely personal preference. But the way that you would do that is you would add a rule to hide by rarity, and you would just hide any rarities you don't want to see. So here in probably 10, 15 levels, mine would look more like that. Now, if you noticed, this is not the priority we would want to have this in. This hide normal, magic, and rare items. So this would hide everything, even if I've decided to recolor my helmet red. So if a helmet drops the 4 affixes I want, which it would be a rare item, assuming it's not exalted that has a tier 6 or 7 affix roll on it, it would be a rare, right? It would hide. My filter would actually hide that item. This is why priority is very, very important. And honestly, the number one thing you need to understand with the loot filter is the priority system. So what we would instead want to do is drop this all the way to the bottom of our loot filter. And I guess I already had normal and magic hidden, but basically what this is going to do is once it's ran through all of my rules and it doesn't meet any of my things that I'm hunting for, it will then filter it out and say you don't need it. We're going to go ahead and remove that, so when I get back to grinding echoes right after I record this video, my loot filter is not messed up. So I think I've really emphasized the importance of the priority system in the loot filter, and also how you can hide rarities and also be able to see everything that you want to see. One more advanced tip for you here, and we're going to go ahead and just make a new rule just so I can show you this. Let's just go ahead and do a recolor here, and we'll do something yellow. What I want to point out here is for your condition, you can filter out by affix, class requirement, level of the item, the rarity, or item type. Item type is where I usually go in and pick the exact items I want. So we are working on a marksman, so let's go ahead and do a bow filter here. Now, if I wanted to be able to recolor items to this yellow so that it was a bow that I want, we could add on affixes that we want to find on this bow. For example, I am running a poison build, so we'd want to come into here and add poison damage. Poison penetration is pretty good, but we're prioritizing poison on there. You can also add in damage over time. And I believe on a bow, you can also get chance to poison on hit. So that's 3 affixes, which would be a yellow if you're going off kind of what I do for my own loot filters. But what's really cool, and this is the pro tip that I want to point out that I think probably gets overlooked. Well, there's 2 tips here, so pay attention. Let's keep going here. The very first one is, so we have 3 affixes picked, right? We have poison damage, damage over time, and chance to poison on hit. So right now, if a bow has just one of those affixes, it'll be recolored yellow. We're going to want to go in here and we're going to make sure actually change that to 3. So we make sure it has all 3 of those affixes on it. And again, this would be a more strict loot filter setup. If you're starting out and you wanted to just do like a green item, you know, for 1 affix, you would just change that down to a 1. You know, any bows that has at least one of those affixes will show up, which is pretty good for when you're very first starting out your build and searching for items. Now, the real last pro tip that I want to point out to you is subtypes. This is a really awesome tool, not only just for setting up your loot filter, but just so you don't have to like go to LE tools or anything. You can see in game what base items exist. So remember, every item in the game, every item slot has base items that can actually roll affixes on. So it is important to know what type of base item we want. So if I'm like level 80, I'm probably not going to want this level 8 short bow, right? So we would not check that because we don't want to recolor that one. That one's not as important to us. But what's really cool is you can come in here and you can actually see what level each of these base items start to drop and the implicit stats on it as well. This is a really, really useful part of the loot filter. And for this one, we're going to go serpent bow. I also like long bow. We don't really need crit since we're doing a poison over time build. I mean, the physical damage would be nice for puncture, but I actually already have this loot filter set up. So, but those are options that you can do for every single item in the game. The other part to this too is if you're making your filters by item slot like I do, you don't want to have 2 different item slots selected. The subclasses will not work. Like right now I have a bow and a piece of armor selected, and so there's no subclass. You can only, this only works if you have one type of item selected. So now we're looking at helmets, and you can see all the different rogue helmets in there. I just think this is a really great tool. It's just in game. You can look for whatever your base items are. I know I just threw a lot of information at you about loot filters in Last Epoch, and I really appreciate your time. And if you're enjoying this video, don't forget that like button, subscribe to the channel. But the other thing I want to point out too here is if you want to actually export this, you can do so down here, and then it'll show a file on your computer, and you can send it to friends if you want on Discord or whatever. And so they can get their own loot filter. And also if you're playing on 2 different PCs like I do, you can send it to yourself as well, because it doesn't save on the cloud for some reason. I guess one other piece of information I want to point out is on those subclasses, if there's certain types of, like, say, rings that you don't want to find at all, you can hide them. Like, for example, I don't want turquoise rings to show up just because there's minion stuff on there, and I don't want that for my poison build that I'm running because there's no minions. But, you know, the downside of that is it could roll all the affixes I want, but I'm far enough along that the base ring does matter. So these subclasses, again, I wouldn't worry about early on in your adventure, but once you're pushing towards the deeper into the end game and your gear is a little bit more finalized, you're going to want to make the loot filter a little bit more stricter. Otherwise, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, if you don't do any of this, you're going to be going back to town like every 30 seconds because there's so much loot and your bags will fill up so quick if you're picking everything up. Now, you could just forego the loot filter and just try to memorize off the names of the prefixes and suffixes on items. I would not recommend doing that. It's just a little bit too much work. I really highly recommend the loot filter. Again, please don't be afraid to just experiment with the loot filter on your own. And hopefully the advice that I've given you in this video will help you get off on the right foot while formulating your own Last Epoch loot filter for your own character and build. That's going to wrap it up for this Last Epoch loot filter guide video. Hopefully you found this video useful and or entertaining. If so, don't forget that like button and subscribe to the channel for more action RPG videos. The best way to support me is through becoming a YouTube channel member today and or leaving a super thanks on the video down below. Your view alone means the absolute world. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.